button at the bottom here which gives me extra options. So if I click on this, I can then take out Saturdays and Sundays from my date list. So if I choose fill weekdays, you'll see it jumps from the 17th to the 20th, and then down here the 24th to the 27th. And I know a lot of people find that so useful because they sit there deleting out all those Saturdays and Sundays when you don't have to do it. This little button at the bottom will do it for you. And there's all sorts of options on here. I can fill months, so it's the same day but different month. And then I can fill years as well. So same day, same month, but different years. So this will control how the autofill works. And if I want to go back to a normal series, I just choose fill series. And that just does a straight through week by week. And I can also choose copy cells, which will then just repeat the first entry. So very, very handy to use that button. And that button has actually been around for quite a few versions of Excel. Now, that's nothing new, but what is new, so if I just get rid of this information here, oh, missed a few bits there. There is something called Flash Fill in Excel 2013. And what Flash Fill allows you to do is actually do some quite clever things. And it's actually very useful when you work with lists of data, and quite often when you import data into Excel, you might have a list of names, but the first name and surname are actually joined together in the cell. And you might need to separate that information out. So a neat little tool is Flash Fill. So I've written in Debbie as the first name, and if I use my right mouse button to drag down through the extra cells here, I will then get an option to Flash Fill. And look what it does. It extracts out the first name of each of those cells. So it's very, very clever. And I can do that again for this information here. So again, when you import databases in, you might find that all the address lines are all stored in the same cell, and I might want to separate the towns or villages. So if I just start typing Great Shelford, and use my right mouse click to drag down and then Flash Fill, you'll see it extracts everything behind that comma. Now down here, another example, I have a list of names and I want to actually join them together. Now some of you may be familiar with something called concatenate perhaps, but this is much easier. I can actually start off, it's a slightly different way to what I just showed you, but I can start off typing in the second entry. So if I start typing O'Gorman, comma, and then I want the name, so Debbie, oops, Debbie, A, and dot. So I'll follow the same sort of format as above, and then I continue that on the next line down. As soon as I start to type that next line, it actually recognizes the pattern, and I can just press enter, and it will just finish off the remaining cells for me. It's actually picked up the bold formatting as well, because I have bold up here, but that is so clever to combine bits and pieces together. So that is known as the Flash Fill. And I get a little button popping up to do with Flash Fill options, much like the autofill options. So if I didn't want that to happen, I can undo it and so on. So very, very handy. So that's a new feature in Excel 2013. Right, moving along, let's have a look at charts. This was one of the requests to cover today. And I think I briefly touched charts on the office session last year. But I've got a nice simple pub list here, a bit early for perhaps the pub. But if I highlight my data that I want to appear on a chart, in 2013 I can go up to Insert, and I have something called Recommended Charts now. So you've got all these same charts as you've had in earlier versions. But if I click on Recommended Charts, I can see that it actually provides me with options straight away for the best type of chart for my data. So I can click down this list just to see what they look like, and I could choose one of those if I wanted to. And I'm actually going to press Cancel. And you may remember from last time, there's a quick key to create a chart. So I've got my data highlighted, and if I just press F11 at the top of my keyboard, there is my chart in its own separate sheet at the bottom. So really nice and quick to create a chart. And much like the previous versions of Excel, I have something called Chart Tools at the top, where I can actually then change and add titles and format my information. So if I want to change my chart type now, I can see that I've got to change chart type over here. And I can go in and change it to lines, pies, bars, all sorts of things. Got loads of options there. I'll just put it back to the column though, just to make it easier. And then I've got chart styles, so quick ways of just formatting. And I've got change colours, so it just updates the colours very quickly. And then I can go over to this button here, Add Chart Element, where I can then start adding titles, axis titles, something called data labels that plots the data, the numbers actually on the bars, data tables, little mini spreadsheets. I can put extra grid lines on if I want, so very quick to add some detail to your chart. And if I want to change the colours of my chart to what I like rather than what it chooses, I can select one of my bars and you can see that it highlights all the way through with the same colour, and I can go up to Format at the top and I can change the shape fill and choose whatever colour I like. Oops, not the same one as I've already got, let's go for green. And I can even put things like shape effects on, like Ready Brek glows, if anyone remembers the days of Ready Brek, or nuclear radioactive glows if you really want them. I'll go and take that off. So that was under shape effects. Now you could do all that in the earlier versions. However, in the new version, I have 3 little buttons here which make things a lot easier to change. So if I click on the plus sign, I can add my titles. And I've got a little arrow on the side of the area here. And I can add a horizontal title, so you can see a box has gone in at the bottom, and I can add a vertical title on the side, so if I tick that. And then all I do is just start typing, so I want pound signs up the side, and you can see it goes in at the top, and I just press enter, and if I click the bottom axis title and just start typing drinks, and press enter, I can just label up, and I've got a chart title area here as well, so pub stock list, and that adds that in. So it's nice and quick to do it from this button here, and I can even add my data labels, and even something called callouts. All right, and we saw all those options actually on the button under design and over here, so it's just another way of actually bringing up that information. But I've also got a little paintbrush, so I can change my styles and my colours again from here. And I've also got a filter button, so some of you might be familiar with filtering lists, but I can actually filter my charts. So if I want to just display January's information, I can untick all and then tick on January and just apply. So it just does January's drinks. And if I only want to know about gin sales, I untick there and add on gin and apply, and you can see it just narrows it down again. So really, really easy to filter information. And I'll just bring it all back on. So select all and apply, and that's back to normal. So very handy for filtering charts if you need that. So the quick key to create a chart is F11, and then you can either use the Format and the Design tab at the top, or you can use the little buttons on the side here. Right, moving on then to looking at calculations. So I'm going to start off with the basics, just to make sure you understand properly how to put together your calculations. So I want to just add up a row of data here, sorry, a column of data here, the January figures. And what I do is use the Autosum. So if I go over to the top right-hand corner, I've got this sort of sideways M, and if I click on that, it automatically picks up my data. It puts a formula in, equals sum, which means to add up, and then in brackets, it's picked up the range B5 colon B15. So everything between those two cells. If I didn't want that range, I can just simply highlight another range. I can just drag over what I want, and you can see the formula changes. And if I want to pick up just separate cells, I can just click on one cell, hold down Control, and then I can just pick up separate cells. And you can see it starts to build up the formula using commas instead. Now I actually just want January, so I'm just going to highlight the January information again and press Enter. And there we go, added up my January figures. Now I do not sit there and repeat the same steps to Autosum for February, Autosum for March, because I could be there all day if I had lots and lots of columns. So that's when I use my autofill again. So getting on that box in the corner and dragging along to repeat the formula. And I can do the same for my rows. I want to add up each drink. So I Autosum it, check the formula, and press Enter. And then a neat little tip, if I just double click the autofill button, it will shoot down and stop when it hits a blank cell, and it just fills in all the data for me. So very quick to add up through your rows there. So moving along, it'll be like being back at school now. Might be scary for you. All right, just showing you some other types of calculations. If I add up again, so I can use my Autosum, and I want to just use the two cells that are written in there. It doesn't matter that I've got a blank cell, it won't affect the answer in this instance, so I can just select those two and I can press Enter. If I want to perform a subtraction, I do not need to use the Autosum. I always double check this because a lot of people still use Autosum and then do a subtraction inside it. You don't need to use Autosum for other types of calculations. So this time I'm going to type an equal sign, click the 100, and then subtract the 50. So I just click the cells that I want to use and press Enter. And I'll do the same for a divide, so equals, click the top cell, and then I use a slash, forward slash for divide, and then press Enter. And a multiply equals, the top cell, star, the bottom cell, and Enter. And then you might need to work out percentages. So I've got an amount of 300, and I might want to work out what 20% is of that 300. So I can type in an equals, click the 300, multiply, and click the cell that contains 20, but I can also just type in a percent sign, which works out the percentage very quickly for me. So you don't need to know that mathematical way of working. I can just type in percentages, which is nice. And there we go, so £60. And then we have brackets. Why use brackets? So this calculation is slightly different in that we are adding and we're multiplying in the same formula. So if I type it in how it's written, so E15 plus the 50 multiplied by the 2, and I press Enter. I'm not using brackets yet, but I just press Enter. I get an answer of 600, but it's wrong. I need to add the 500 to 50, which is 550, and then multiply by 2, which should give me an answer of 1100. So I need to be aware of this rule of mathematics, which will take you back to your school days perhaps, in that there's an order of how things get worked out. And multiply is higher up that order than adding. So what it's done in this instance is it's multiplied the 50 times 2, which is 100, and then added the 500 last of all. But I don't want it to work like that. So what I can do is double click my answer, and it reveals the formula, and then I can just put in my brackets around the adding area, which will tell Excel to do that bit first, and then multiply by the 2, and then you get the right answer. So it's very important to understand why you use brackets, and it's all because there is an order of how things get worked out. You might know something called BODMAS, that might ring a bell with some of you. Okay, so that's the order I'm sort of working to. So those are what we consider sort of simple calculations. Moving on, you can then start to analyze data using something called functions. And functions are ready-made calculations. We've used a function already, which was Autosum. I can just press a button and it just immediately adds up a load of numbers. And what a function tends to be, it has a name written after an equal sign. So you might have come across things like equals count. Somebody's actually raised a question about that, so I know a few of you have come across this. So if I just do an Autosum, I've got a list of students, they've sat exams, and I want to first of all work out their total score. So if I use my Autosum again, so this is a type of function that I'm using. All right, so that's one function, and you can see it's got a word after the equal sign. And what I can also do is use some other type of functions to work things out. So I can find out what the highest total score is, or the lowest total score, or even the average, without having to add them all up and divide by how many there are. And then also count up how many students there are. So if I click where I want the answer, go over to my Autosum button, I then have a list of other functions I can use. So I want something called max, and it creates this function for me, or a formula for me, and it picks up the B column, or paper 1 columns. I'm not interested in that, so I'm going to highlight my total scores. So that's going to find the highest total out of that list. And if I press enter, that returns the highest number, which is actually the bottom one. So if you were in a sales environment, for example, that would return the highest sales figure. And if max is highest, I can then choose min to work out the lowest of the total scores. And then the average of the total scores. So very quick to work out. And then I also want to count up the people's names. So if I count and highlight the names, oops, it goes wrong. Now when I use the count on that list, count, you can see the formula up the top here, count will only count up cells containing numbers. So we've got text written here, that's why it's returned 0. However, I can count up cells containing text, and that is by using another function called count A. So all I need to do is double click the 0 and actually change the name of my function to be count A. And you can see a little pop-up comes up there, and it tells me that it will count the number of cells in a range that are not empty. So it will count text or numbers. So if I press enter, and there you go, 8 people sat the test. So there's some nice functions that you can use. There are lots of things out there, and if I just go and click on a blank space, I can show you by going into something called More Functions. In here will list me everything that you can do in Excel. So if I click on this little drop down, I've got All, and underneath are all the functions that Excel can perform as standard. And there's lots of weird and wonderful things in there for science, for finance, all sorts of things. One of the questions that was sent to me is understanding a bit more about count and a bit more about sum and sum if, which I'm going to cover at the end. But it's worth having a look at in here, but a lot of this can be quite tricky. But you can get help on this function by linking up to the internet as well. And if I press cancel to come out of that. So that's what a function is, and basically it's a name of a calculation. Now, moving on from those functions, you can also highlight and display who got over a certain pass mark. And I can use something called conditional formatting for that. Highlight cell rules, and I can choose greater than, and I'm going to set a pass mark of 250, and I choose OK. And look at that, it's highlighted straight away who's passed. So conditional formatting can be a very useful tool as well to find information for you. And I can clear that just by highlighting the area. Go back into conditional formatting and clear. And you can do things like this. If I highlight the other block, I can go into conditional formatting. I can choose data bars, sort of mini charts showing high, low numbers, or color scales, ranges of numbers, or even icon sets to show high, low, or drops, or increases. So that's quite a nice one to check out in your own time. Right, the final calculation to look at before we come on to working with lists is using dollar signs in calculations. You may have come across these or seen them and wondered what they were. So I've got a little example here of exchange rates, as it's the holiday season, and I have got lots of money here that I want converted into dollars based on the exchange rate up here. And I've also got lots of money that I want to convert into euros based on that exchange rate, and another load that I want to convert into yen based on this exchange rate here. So if I put in a calculation to work that out, so equals the money times the exchange rate, and press enter. And I think that's great. I get $15,000 for £10,000, so I think great. I'll copy that down to work out all the others, and it starts to go wrong. So before you delete anything, check your answer. So I'm just going to double click, and it's picked up the money multiplied by the exchange rate. So I'll go to the second one. It's picked up the money, but can you see it's dropped down to the next exchange rate? And if I go to the third answer, it's picked up the third money, but it's dropped down to the third exchange rate. So it's moving away from the exchange rates when I don't want it to. And this is known as relative addressing or relative referencing. And it's trying to do the same thing next line down, same thing next line down, but just dropping down those cells. And I don't want that to happen, obviously, for moving away from the exchange rate. So this is where dollar signs come in. So if I double click my cell at the top, make sure my cursor is sitting on the C4 area, and then I just press F4 at the top of my keyboard, F4, and that will put dollar signs in. And what that does is it tells Excel to lock onto column C and lock on to row 4. So it will just stick on that cell and use that again and again. So if I just press enter and then fill down the answers, you'll see it starts to work. And if I double click, you'll see it multiplies by that C4, multiplied by the C4, all the way down. So those dollar signs lock onto it. So if I work out these, multiplied by the euro, and I press F4, fill it down, and this time multiplied by the yen, and press F4. And now, the great thing, because exchange rates change all the time, I can change my exchange rates up the top here, and it updates the list underneath. So I can change my euro, I think it's about 1.3 now, and it changes in the list. I don't know what the yen is, I'll just guess, and it changes it. So very useful if you need to reference a different cell, okay, or the same cell all the time. And this is known as absolute referencing. So the first way, when it was going wrong, is called relative referencing, as it does the same thing next line down, same thing next line down. But this way is absolute referencing, where it locks on. Very useful. You may have come across it. Okay, finally then, working with lists of information. So if I go over to my next sheet, I have a long list of data here. Sales of sports balls, products, when they were sold. I have the salesperson as well and how much that order was in the sales column. Now, first of all, I might want to sort it. So there's lots of different ways to sort. I can sort from sort and filter on the right-hand side of home. I can go to data at the top, and you've got sorting options in there. But what I quite like to do is actually add these little buttons at the top of my screen, which is just by clicking on the drop-down out on the end of the toolbar, and I've just ticked these sorting buttons on. And they just stay at the top for whenever I need to use them. So all I do, if I want to sort by product, I just click into the product area and just press my A to Z button. And it just sorts all my footballs together, all my netballs together, and so on. And it keeps everything in line. I haven't separated each column out. So if I want to sort by sales information, I just click into sales, and I can sort low to high, or the opposite way, high to low, or the salesperson. So very quick to use. Now what I might want to do is actually sort by more than one column at the same time, which is when I can use custom sort. So if I go over to sort and filter on the right, and I have custom sort, and in here I might want to sort first of all by the product. So if I change that to be product, and I want it in A to Z order, but I then want to sort within the product the salesperson. So if I add a level and change that to salesperson, so every time I add a level, that's just adding another column that you can sort on. And if I choose OK, what that should do, it will put all my products in order, so footballs all together, and then it also sorts all my names out in order within that grouping. So that's very useful to do. So you've got a quick sort using the toolbar buttons at the top, and then you've also got the custom sort as well. Moving on from sorting, you can then look at filters where you can extract information from a list. So instead of sorting your information just to find all the footballs or find all the netballs, you can filter information, then it hides what you don't want to see. So if I go over to sort and filter again on the right and choose my filter button, it puts little arrows along the top, and then I can extract just footballs from the list. So I can remove the tick to select all and tick footballs on, and you can see it hides everything else and just shows me footballs. I could then narrow that down to just show me Chloe's details, so I can click on the salesperson and just click Chloe and it narrows it down. So it takes sorting to a better level, a higher level. So you can cross filter, and I can clear the filter from each one to bring it back. So you can remove the ticks, add the ticks and so on, which is nice. But also you've got extra filters. So if I go into the sales area, I have something called number filters. So for example, if I wanted to see a range of numbers, so I want to know anybody who sold between or greater than £5,000 worth of sales. So if I go to the greater than or equal to option under number filters, greater than or equal to, and just type in 5,000 and choose OK, it will automatically find all those sales entries of more than £5,000. And they're not in any order, so I can go back into my filter and I can use sorting within there at the top. So sort smallest to largest. So it's not just about using the tick boxes. You can go in and use something called number filters as well to give you extra bits and pieces. And you can see I can do top 10 items, I can do above average, below average, and so on. So that's quite nice too. So if I clear that. So you have sorting, you have filters, but you still might not be easily getting the results that you want to see. And with data like this, there's quite a lot of entries of footballs, there's quite a lot of salespeople. I might want to answer questions like who was the best salesperson, how much did they sell over a certain amount of time, and so on. And this is where you lead on to pivot tables. So if sorting and filtering isn't really getting what you want, that's when you need to start to look at pivot tables. So what I'm going to do is just turn off my filters for the moment. So I'm going to go back over to sort and filter, press the filter button again to clear it. And I just have a normal list. I haven't done anything special to this list. It's just been typed in as standard. And what I can do is go up to Insert at the top. And I have, in 2013, two options here. I can choose Recommended Pivot Tables, which will summarize my data into a little table of either of these two options. So it can summarize it by salesperson and their sales, or it can summarize it by products and their sales. I'm actually going to show you how you can build a pivot table from scratch. So I'm going to press cancel, and I'm just going to go for the pivot table option, which is the same in previous versions of Excel as well. So if I click on pivot table here, it asks me where do I want to put my new table. And what it does, it will actually put it into a separate sheet. So it checks the range that I'm using. So this is the range, and it's going to go into a new worksheet. So you don't actually affect your original data, which is nice. So I choose OK, and I'll end up with an extra sheet down the bottom here. It's just sort of hanging off there. So if I just scroll along a little bit, there we go. So here's my new sheet. Here, this is where is going to be my pivot table, this little bit here. And then over on the right-hand side are my field areas, or my field panel. And this is where I create my pivot table. So these are my headings from my list. So what I want to do is I want to display the product down in the rows. So if I just drag it into the row box down here, you'll then see it builds up the information. And then if I get hold of the salesperson and drag it into the columns, and you can see it starts to build up across the columns. And then I actually want to see the data, which is the sales. So I drag it into the values area, and look at that. It has just summarized all that data that I had on that other sheet very quickly into some kind of order. So I can see Chloe has sold £19,000 worth of footballs, and likewise all the other salespeople. So it's very, very easy to quickly summarize data. And the reason why it's called a pivot table is perhaps I might want to change how I display that. So what I can do, I can decide, well, actually, I don't want salespeople in the columns, I want it in the rows. So I'm going to swap them around. I'm going to drag salesperson down into rows, and I'll end up with both of them in there. And you can see it puts them all together in the row list. But let's say I want product in the columns, and I just swap them around. So it just makes it look a little bit different. And I might decide that I don't want to see the sum of sales. I might want to count up how many entries there were for netballs, or how many entries there were for squash balls, how many sales orders, in other words. So if I go to the sum of sales down the bottom here, and go into value field settings, and choose count, and OK, it changes what I'm displaying. So Chloe had 3 sales orders for footballs. And look how quick that was to generate a report. And if I want to see those 3 sales, I can double click on that 3, and it will actually create another sheet at the bottom detailing those sales orders. Amazing. So I've got sheet 1 and sheet 2 for pivot tables. So if I go back to the first pivot table, that was the initial one I created, but I drilled down for Chloe's footballs, and it actually then displayed just that data there. So all I did was I double clicked on one of these entries, and it just gave me another summary for that particular entry. And that is what pivot tables are all about, is summarizing the data and quickly creating reports for you. One final thing just to finish off. I've shown you a lot in this half-hour session, so I hope it's recorded so you can look back on it. But a final new feature to look at. Now I've shown you charts, I've shown you pivot tables, I've shown you something called conditional formatting, where you can color code numbers that are greater than a certain amount. So what you can do, if I highlight my data here, I get this little button popping up at the bottom for quick analysis, and this is just available in 2013. But all those features that I've shown you this morning, I can quickly get from this button here. Now I'm actually going to get rid of these totals because it's going to show you something. So I'll get rid of those, and I'll highlight my data here again. I press this quick analysis button, and then straight away it can analyze my data very quickly with the use of formatting. And this was the conditional formatting I showed you earlier. I can show you greater than numbers. So there we go. If I go up to charts at the top, I can quickly change and create a chart using this button. I can go across to totals, and I can add up very quickly. Look, it adds in the row underneath my data to sum, or average, or count, or percentage total. And that's along the bottom, but I can also put it along the columns as well. So I've got these little buttons to work out the column information. So very, very handy. And then if I move across to tables as well, it's not quite the right data, but I can also create pivot tables very quickly from here. It's not quite the data to display on that. And then I also have something called spark lines, which came in 2010. And these are miniature charts. So like forecast lines or trend lines or columns. So this is called the Quick Analysis tool. So very quickly you can visually display your data using these areas along the top. So some nice features in Excel 2013. So hopefully that's given you a few bits and pieces to think about, a few tips. So we've got about 20 minutes left of the session to answer some questions. So I've got a couple of questions already. So what I will do is just have a quick look. I just need to send Arthur a message. Bear with me a second. Okay, so the first couple of questions I had was from Charles Jennings. So I hope you're attending today, Charles. And one of the questions was how to copy rows and columns of formatted data into a new tab of a worksheet. I don't want to copy all the data you've mentioned, okay, you just want a selected area. So I'm just wondering whether I'm going to answer this too simplistically for you. If need be, I might have to talk to you separately after the session, but any data that I want to copy and paste or copy onto another sheet, I can literally just copy and paste it. So I can highlight an area, I would right click on it, copy it, and then I'd go onto a different sheet, and then I can just right click, and then I choose one of the pasting options. So the first button is just the default paste, but you've got various options on this list to control how it pastes in. There's even one for a paste link, so that means if it changes on the first sheet, it will update this area on the second sheet. So it's a link button. So I'm not sure whether that is too simplistic for you, Charles, so we might have to have a word later on, but it's just a simple copy and paste. The other question that you raised was the difference between count A. Well, I've done that today already. So count will only count up cells containing numbers. Count A will count up cells containing text or numbers. But you've also mentioned something called a count if and count ifs, and also something called sum if and sum ifs. So what I've done is I've created an extra sheet along here. So some of you may have come across these extra functions. And what I've done is my list again on here, and I've extracted some information. So I've created some formulas to work out these answers. So the formula in here is using something called a sum if. And what a sum if does, it sums up values relating to a certain criteria. So what I've done here is I only want to sum up anything that equals Chloe. So I've created a formula that looks up in the D column, D2 to D56, and it finds Chloe, and then it will return the sum of what's in the B column, so B2 to B56. So that's the formula that I've created there. And that's known as a sum if. There is also called a sum ifs, which has an S on the end. And what that allows you to do is do multiple criteria. So it's going to sum up if it's Chloe and it's netball. So it just sums the values based on Chloe and based on netball. So that's a formula for that one. And likewise, the count if will count up entries based on whether it's, say, netballs. So it looks up in a range, finds the word netballs, and will only count up those entries. And then count ifs, with an S, will count up whether it's netballs and it relates to Chloe. So there's a formula to do that. However, those formulas can look quite complicated and maybe quite scary. A lot of that information I can get by producing a pivot table, which might be an easier way of working. So I showed you pivot tables earlier on, but if I've just created one for this kind of thing. So if I go over to this sheet, I've created a pivot table already to break down the sum of sales. You can see this, all my sales information according to product and salesperson. So I can see Chloe sold £3,445 worth of netballs. That's the same as summing doing the sum ifs for Netballs and Chloe. So it can be an easier way of extracting that information. And if I want to know the count, I can change that sum of sales by clicking on it and changing the field settings and go to count. Or I've got it formatted as currency. I'll take that off if it's not currency setting. I can go back in here and choose general. Okay, and Chloe sold 4 orders for Netballs, which is the same as this bit here, which is the count ifs. So pivot tables can make it easier rather than doing the actual formula. So I hope that sort of give you a little bit of an understanding of count ifs, and sum ifs. So now I can't see the questions at the moment, so I'll send Arthur a message.
Hello, can you hear me? Yeah, you can hear me, can you? Yeah.
Yeah, I can hear you, yeah.
Yeah, good. Okay. Well, I have some more questions for you.
Okay, you fire them away and I'll see whether I can answer them.
Well, there are a couple that have come from Luca Meyer, and it's also an issue that I have because this is about Excel for Mac.
Okay.
So one question is, would the function you propose function also in Excel for Mac? He doesn't refer to which one it was, but
F4. It could be the F4 because I know that's not the same key on a Mac. And on a Mac, you have to do so. The F4 was what I used for the dollar signs to fix the cell to make it absolute. And on a Mac, it's the Command key and T, Command T, and that will do your dollar signs.
Okay.
You can also just type in dollar signs as well, though.
Well, that's what I knew about the dollar signs. I've never knew how to put them in automatically, so that's a real...
Yeah, Command and T will do it automatically, if I remember rightly.
And the other thing he said, which was about Mac, he's using Excel for Mac 2011, which is the version I'm using, and he also says that he's testing 2016. But 2013 is not available for Mac. Certainly not the way I buy it, because I buy it on the license. I don't want to necessarily go into that, but we do have quite a few Mac users in our group. So what's the situation with Microsoft and Excel and Mac in 2013? Do you know?
The Mac versions follow different version numbers. So the 2016 version will be equivalent to the 2013 version.
Ah, okay.
2011 is equivalent to 2010 on the PC.
Right, okay.
Yeah, so they don't follow the same version numbers.
Ah, okay. So the version that you're talking about, which is 2013
on a PC,
is what version?
Would be similar to 2016 on the Mac.
Okay, which Luca is testing that. Let's hope that comes through soon. Right, let's talk about.
They're not always identical though. That's the thing.
Yeah. Okay, I've got a few questions. Graham Griffiths. He says, how can you export the chart from Excel into PowerPoint without messing up the formats? Now, he doesn't go into detail about what messing up the formats is, but again, I know that I've been challenged when moving from Excel to PowerPoint, although PowerPoint now uses Excel in the background for chart generation. So just tell us about that.
Okay, so if I generate a chart, so I'm just going to highlight my data. I'm going to press F11 to create my chart. Now, I can't remember whether that's the same keystroke on a Mac. I'll look into that. Okay, so there's my chart. And what I can do is just copy it. So I'm just going to right-click on my chart and copy. I'm going to open up PowerPoint. Just change the layout to blank. And then I right-click, and I get different pasting options. And this is where you can control how it looks. So the first button I'm hovering on, it says it's using the destination theme. So it might change the colors and things like that to be different from Excel. So if I go along to the second one, it says keep source formatting. So if you have manipulated it in Excel and you've changed all the colors in Excel before you've copied it across, it's the second button you want to go for, where it says keep source formatting. You've then got the third button where it says use destination theme and link data. And what that means is it will convert it to the colours in PowerPoint, but your data will be linked so that if anything changes in Excel, it will actually feed through into PowerPoint, and that can be quite handy. And then there's another button there where it says keep the source formatting. So it'll keep all the formatting from Excel, and it will also link. So again, any changes to the data, it will feed through. And finally, there's a picture button option, which is always, well, not always, but perhaps the best option to go for is you paste it in as a picture, and then it keeps it exactly the same as you had it in Excel, but you won't be able to make any changes in PowerPoint. It just becomes a picture. You can't manipulate it. You can't do anything. So it's just really a case of using these little pasting buttons. You can just hover on each one just to see what they look like. In my case, I haven't changed any settings, so they all look the same. But to keep the Excel formatting, you want to go for that keep source one. So I hope that has answered that for you.
Yeah, that's great. I've got another question here from Lynn Chapman.
Yeah.
She uses Excel 2013, but it has a very annoying habit. I'm typing, and suddenly nothing will appear. It seems to have frozen. The only way to make it work is to come out of the file, go into another Excel file, click, and then return to my file where it will then work. This happens many times during a session.
I've never come across that.
I think it's time for Lynn.
An upgrade, perhaps, on the computer.
Well, I don't know, but I mean, Excel 2013 is up to date. Lynn doesn't say anything about how old her machine is.
Yeah,
So
it needs quite a powerful machine, so that could be why that the machine isn't up to spec, perhaps.
Okay.
But I don't know. I haven't seen that before.
Okay. Well, maybe if you don't mind, Lynn could give you a call and just check that one thing out.
Absolutely.
Now, but she has another question, and I think this is highly relevant for many of us. If you're cleaning a database, can Excel 2013 delete duplicate entries? I've found out how to highlight them, but then have to manually delete. So please.
No. Okay, let's see if I've got any duplicate entries. I might have to create some. So let's see. Well, let me use this. I'll copy some data. So we've got a duplicate in the list. So okay, so you can see I've got two lots of vodka lines here, and all the data is exactly the same as well. So up on the data tab at the top, I have something called remove duplicates. Now you've got to be very careful when using this. I suggest you save your file first before you press it, because it will immediately remove the duplicates, and if you suddenly think, oh, I didn't want it to do that, you've lost your original data. So always save it or create a copy and just test it first of all. So if I just click on this remove duplicates button, it selects all the data, and I can then choose where I want it to check. So do I want it to check every single column for a duplicate? So I want it to be completely matched all the way along the line, okay? Or I could just match it down in particular columns. But I'm just going to leave all of them ticked, so it should take out the vodka entries. So if I choose OK, there we go, one duplicate value was found and removed. Choose OK, and there you go, it's taken out the whole of that vodka line.
Fantastic. Wonderful, wonderful.
All right, so you don't have to use the conditional formatting to highlight them. You can remove the duplicates, but as you can see, it takes it out straight away.
Yeah.
Let's just see if I can actually undo to bring it back, actually. There you go. So I've brought it back with undo. So if you do have a panic, you can undo it.
And in the meantime, Lynn has actually come back and said her machine is not very old. So.
I don't know then. Have you got any third-party software? Because sometimes third-party software can cause little blips. I don't know, actually. I might have a look, see what I can find on that, but I haven't come across that.
Okay. So if anybody has any more questions, then please post them in the questions box. We have another 5 minutes of of Rachel's time, so we can cover one or two more if we need to.
Yeah, what I'll do is I'll just put in the meantime, I'll just put my details on the screen. So if you do want to contact me directly, okay, so there's my office telephone number and my email address. So if you want to contact me directly, you can.